Hello. In 2019, I created my first tarot deck, and Tarot Marseille by Patishi. And I wanted to go over, I thought I would make a YouTube about that deck and what I did with it and how I did it. And it might help you if you're making a deck too. But it also shows you the details of my Marseille deck versus other Marseille decks. And I can go over some why I did things, why the way I did it. And I thought I would make that a YouTube on that. The deck is, by the way, it's Creative Commons deck. So the license and copyright is a Creative Commons deck, which means you can use this deck commercially in your work, royalty-free. You can download the whole deck from my website, tarotmaps.com. Those are print-ready files. They're in color, actual size, and they're just free. So the only thing you have to do is in your work, you have to put in there the tarot cards used in this book are the Tarot Marseille by Patishi, copyright 2019. I have 50 years with the tarot. 30 of those years is professional. And I tell you, it's just been such a wonderful ride. It's been, Linda and I have been working together since 93 as pros. And I wouldn't trade it for nothing. I don't have any certificates, no licenses or nothing like that. I got my certificates on the streets and I loved it. Working fairs, corporate events, house parties, you name it. We did it. And you can too. So it's just my gift back to the tarot community. And that's that. But it was a nice project. It took me about a year to do. I didn't work on it all the time, but the reason I wanted to make a deck like that is because I over the years I saw things about the deck that I would like to change. And if I was working with, I had a lot of students over the years, and I always teach with the Rider-Waite deck. But my deck was always out there, and people would look through they take my deck and they'd be looking through it, and they would always say, I don't know how you read with this. I could never read with this deck. And I know what they were looking at. For the most part, they were familiar with the cards, so they know that the suit of cups, the suit of coins, the majors, but they saw those swords and they saw those wands and it threw them off because they just don't look like swords and wands. So there was always little things like that I wanted to change. And I think a lot of people bought my deck now. It's been out for 3 years. But I don't know if they realize the changes that are in there. When you see something like a Marseille Tarot deck, you've seen it so many times, you don't really look at the detail. It's almost like looking at the Coca-Cola logo. You see this logo so much, you don't really look at it. You don't look at the details of it. You just know what it is, Coca-Cola logo. The same with the Marseille deck. You've seen the Marseille deck. If you're familiar with tarot cards, you don't really look at it. You just know it's the Marseille. So the details that are different in mine, I think might be interesting to go over. I still have the original artwork on my deck. And so I blew up the cards to 200% so I have something to work with. I scanned them 200%. And then I used that as a guide. I used Grimmett's tarot deck as a guide for my deck. And then I drew the artwork. Well, here you can see this is my art. Now these are 200%. So when I scan these in, I scan them at 50% and they'll be the size of an actual tarot deck. And this is what I did. You can see that this is the artwork and that these were done in pencil. What's nice about that, what I liked about that was that you could actually see my marks, my pencil marks in my deck. But I did not make vector lines in this for print. I used my pencil drawings in my deck. So the actual deck is my work, my actual artwork. And I like it like that. I keep this real nice and safe here. One of the things with the new tarot decks is that the size has changed. The original art for this fit on a 4 3/4 high by 2.5 wide, 2.5 inches wide, 4 3/4 high. Newer standard size tarot decks today, whatever the deck is, are the same height, 4 3/4, but they're wider now. Now they're 2 3/4 instead of 2.5. That's a 1/4 inch wider on the decks today. Now, if you want to print your own deck, you're going to go to a supplier, a printer who has standard size die cuts available, and they'll have a tarot size, and the tarot size will be the standard size today, 4 3/4, 2 3/4 wide. So the old Marseille decks are narrower than today's standard die cut. Now you could have a special die cut made, but it would cost you a lot of money. So I had to do some revisions to the deck, and I wanted to make some changes anyway. But I wanted to keep the look of a Marseille deck. So I wanted to change it, but I wanted to keep it the same. So there was a lot of that whole year of work. A lot of it was just thinking. I also changed the palette here. Here is the 2 of coins. Grimma deck on the one side and my deck on the other. On the right is Grimma, mine's on the left. And when I did this card here is when I realized that I was doing this deck was being made when I was involved with the tarot for 50 years. But I got involved with the tarot in 1969. I released the deck in 2019. And so it was 50 years. So because I didn't know what I was going to put in the type in this ribbon here. They always have the type in here. And here they have 1748 on the Grimma deck. 1748 BP Grimma, 1930 on the bottom date. And that's probably when they first came out with their first Marseille deck was 1748. Or when they went into business, I'm not too sure. And then I guess they're coming out with this style Marseille deck in 1930. For some reason, there was a significant date for this particular deck. So I put on my ribbon 1969, VC Patici, Christopher, and 2019 for the when the deck was released. As I show some of these cards here, you'll see the palette. I wanted to change the palette too. But you can notice the width here on these two cards. The Grimma deck has a narrower look to it. When I made my deck, I did not want to go with paper white background. I have very little paper white in my deck. If you look at the little tiny leaves here, you'll see that they're paper white. But the other stem on the floral thing here that's white is a dirty white. And I wanted a dirty white in my palette. On the side of my deck, you'll see that's my palette for the deck. On the side of the Grima deck, you'll see that that's the palette for their deck. I wanted to change the colors. I wanted to change the palette to a colors that I think today would be more appealing today. As far as I'm concerned, the classic Tarot Marseille, this Grima deck here, is the best thing out there. It's a classic. But I just wanted to make my deck different. So I changed the palette on my deck. I also went with a rounder cornered border. And I did that with all my decks that I made. I made a Swiss deck the same way. And because cards now have a round corner on the cards, where when this deck, the Marseille deck, came out, the cards were cut square. So the borders are cut square too. So we have sharp corners on the corners of these cards. They wore out a lot quicker. And they used to have actual machine that would with a pair of scissors on a plate that you could trim your cards square again and sharpen them up. But today we have round cornered cards. So I wanted to change my border with a round corner, just like the trimming of the card was. I didn't want my background to be paper white. I wanted it to be something else. And I got this ghosted pattern in here it's sort of like a wear to it. It's not consistent. It's a texture. It's actually a little darker on the bottom than it is on the top. And that's what I went with. And each one of these cards has that in there. I made some other slight changes here too. Here we have the death card. And you can see now, like I said, we had to go wider. So I had to draw in a little bit of a hip bone here for the death card. I eliminated his nose. Skeletons don't have noses, and I didn't like that, so I got rid of the nose. And subtle things like that you wouldn't really notice unless it was brought out to you. The Fool card, I did change the hands. And that's basically all I did on that. I made the sack that's being held by this stick he has on his shoulder a little bit more pronounced so you see what's going on there. That is a spoon, by the way, with a long handle on it. And there's a story for that I mentioned in another YouTube, is that a beggar, a traveler like this, would carry a spoon with him. And he would go, just traveling around, he would go to different camps at night. Different people camped out for the night. And they're usually cooking a pot of something. And he would come up with his spoon in his hand and ask if he could have a cup of a spoonful of their stew or their soup. So if you had your own spoon, it made it easier for you to get a quick bite from another camper. The King of Cups was an interesting card because the right shoulder on the cup, on the king, on the original classic deck, it's confusing on what that is. It doesn't break right. And I guess they got lost in what they were doing with it. They didn't really, so they just left it without color in it. And I didn't like that. So I made my own shoulder there. And I also got rid of all those busy creases here in his right arm. It didn't look right. These are things that you wouldn't really notice unless they were called to your attention. And a lot of them are just basically the same thing. Here we have my Page of Swords. And again, I liked my palette better today. I didn't change anything with the Page of Swords, really. It's just, like I said, these are all my drawings. So they're not the same as the original deck. The Knight of Coins was an interesting card. Because if you look at the back side, the back and the back side of this horse, his back end is way up in the air. I think this knight bought his horse from a used horse salesman, and the horse was in an accident and got rear-ended real bad. So it was the damaged goods here. And what I think happened, the horse doesn't look right. This is not right. I've seen a crop so close to the horse's backside, you don't really notice it. When you have to add a little bit more space to it, it really becomes pronounced. So what I did is I made that his saddle, this area, and I adjusted the backside to be a little bit more in proportion to what it would normally be. If you see on my palette, I have the bottom colors is purple. There's splashes of this purple is in the deck here and there, very sparse, but it's hardly any purple in the deck. The Empress was a card that was some big change to it, a major change. Here we have the Empress on the original. Her right arm wraps around that shield. Now, because of the extra space on this card, more of her arm shows. And you realize that that arm would not be able to do what it's doing. Her arm is way longer than it would have to be to do what it's doing. So what I did is I tucked the shield in a little bit, and I wrapped her arm around that shield in a better way to make it look more in proportion. The Queen of Wands. I never liked the fact that she's holding this big, heavy club at the very end of that club. You don't even see the bottom of that club coming out from the bottom of her hand. This never really made any sense to me. So what I did with mine is I extended the club all the way down to the floor. It's now a staff instead of just a club. And again, the hands are a little different. Temperance. With the more width to the card, it looked like the wing was missing. It just looked that way on her left side. So I added the wing at the bottom here. The tip of her wing is in my card. So these are all small little changes that I did, and it worked out nice. The biggest changes I made, though, were those two suits, the swords and the wands. And like I said, when people were seeing these cards for the first time, they were looking at them and saying, I don't know what these are. And I knew they were looking at the suits of swords and the suit of wands. I knew they knew what the cups were and the pentacles. And I knew they knew what the majors were. So I wanted to make a different look on the swords and the wands that people could identify right away. That's what this is. A traditional Marseilles deck, on the swords, we know that the swords are curved and the wands are straight. But other than that, you don't know why this is called a sword. There's no point on this thing to make it be a sword. You have to assume one end is a handle and the other end is the sword. I worked on this patterns, a lot of different patterns here for my swords, pips. I don't know how long, a couple months, maybe a month. I'm not too sure. I made a lot of different ones. And I finally came up with this. And to this allowed me to have the design of the pips where it still looked like a Marseille deck, but you can tell that these are swords. You can see I also took the color out of these where they interlock with each other. This blue color here. I didn't use that. I just kept it black. And this looked a lot nicer for me. Here we have the 8 of Swords. Same thing. Now in the original, there's areas here where these swords interlock in this blue area. But they didn't have the control to show that in their printing. So they just left it a blotch of blue. They couldn't put white in there in these little areas. So again, I left that out. I didn't want to put color in there. I just kept it black. I thought it looked better. And with the wands, I did the same thing. I changed the style of the wands. To these, this made me feel like it had more of a look of a wand. The floral in these cards are the same as a classic deck. The pattern, the way the cards are laid out are the same. I just changed a little bit of the way the pips look and made some minor changes to the images on some of the cards. And I changed the palette. So I thought I would go over that with you on this and share that with you. Like I said, when you have something you've seen over and over again, it's something this has been around all our lives. It's been around for centuries, the Marseille. You see it at a glance, you don't really look at it. And I'm happy that my cards came out in a way where you could glance at my pip cards and say, this is a Marseille deck, even though I've made changes to it. That's the biggest accomplishment I think I did with this deck. To me, those swords remind me of a Marseille sword, and the same with the wands. Because at a glance, you're not going to know. You're not going to look. You're not going to see a difference. So to say that is a to bring it out. I thought I'd just point that out to you. Just like looking at that Coca-Cola logo, you don't really look at it. It's something you've seen a million times. But if you look at this Coca-Cola logo, look at it close. It's not the logo. It says Coca-Cola. You don't always pay attention to detail when you see something over and over again. You don't look at it that deep. Which is why I thought I would point out the details of my deck and show the difference of them. I like my Marseille deck. I feel it was a real accomplishment for me. And I was really happy with it. Incidentally, the back of the deck, the pattern is a French wallpaper from the 1700s. That's what this design is. So anyway, my Tarot Marseille. I do have decks here still at the house. You can buy them from me, from my website at tarotmaps.com. Or you can buy them at the card company, international store. If you're buying in the US, you want to buy them from me, you can buy them right from me. If you're outside of the US, you can buy them from MPC, the card company, in my international store on my website. They're both there on tarotmaps.com, USA store and the international store. So anyway, I hope you like this Tarot Marseille by Batishi. Came out in 2019. But keep throwing cards. We'll talk soon. Bye.